Okay. First of all, thank you for meeting me here today. So, right now, last year I worked in a few campaigns, in election campaigns, particularly city. Right now, few city council campaigns.
Okay. For who?
Right now, I'm working for Mr. Shannon, Mr. Joshua Shannon of Louisville.
Okay.
He has a runoff going on, so there's that. But whenever I worked in these campaigns, I noticed how it is important for campaigns themselves to get out information that is right, because it is often that, especially in those city Facebook groups or whatever, people don't try to send in wrong information, but unawares of themselves, they sometimes do. And it is imperative upon campaigns to correct that. I saw that as a problem. If there is no campaign to correct that, then who's going to correct it?
Right.
So that's why I took up this little project, if you will, to try and do my own little part about that. And when I was looking into journalists to interview, I followed you in the Dallas Morning News for a while now, and I liked your article where you particularly said knowledge is not dead but just sick.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me, so I'm so glad that I could talk to you today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for reading.
Yeah. So first off, I just want to start off with this question. If you could tell me a little about your work, how it has evolved over the years.
Well, my first job in journalism was at a little daily paper in Corsicana, Texas. Then I worked for the Star-Telegram for a while. I was just doing education reporting. I was just a beat reporter. And then I got out of journalism. But since I've been back, which I think is what you're asking about, I've only worked in opinion journalism. And so it's kind of a different animal. Maybe not as different as you might think, or some people might think, because I think there's an impression that the opinion side, they're not real journalists. They don't really do reporting. They just spew opinions. And we do actually, we do a lot. We do our own reporting when we write an editorial or a column like you were talking about. Like for that column, I interviewed an expert on knowledge, So it's not the same as the newsroom produces, but it's still, you still have to know how to do the work. And then 2 years ago or so, I stepped into these editor role, so I'm the op-ed editor. And now I'm not writing as much. I'm working with outside contributors to edit their copy and stuff like that. So anyway, that's my day-to-day.
Right.
That answers your question.
Did
I see a fountain pen in your hand?
Yeah.
I like you even better now. I collect fountain pens.
Oh, so do I.
Do you?
Yeah, but...
in fact, I'm going to... This is not what you came here for, but I'm going to a shop after this, and then tonight I'm going to like a pen club thing.
Oh.
So I have
There's a pen club?
There's a pen club if you're ever interested. So I have some pens that I'm trying to sell. Anyway. These are like older, and these are some.
Oh, it's fun to come across.
That's my. I just spotted here, so had to geek out for a minute. That's my nerd thing.
That's still an intrigue that I like. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, if I could follow up on that. So what pushed you into opinion journalism?
I didn't. It was just I was writing op-eds for. So I when I got out of journalism, I worked at a church for 10 years, and I was just contributing op-eds during that time and writing about kind of faith and culture things. And I started doing that more and more. At the same time, the church was changing, and I wasn't as good a fit there, so it sort of just did this. And anyway, and then they had a job opening, so I applied. So it wasn't like I really wanted to get into opinion writing. It was just a natural fit that happened over time.
Right. So you mentioned your work in faith, and I've also read up on how you were a pastor for a while, and you still are.
Right.
So how does your journalism and how does your style of journalism blend both the idea of faith and journalism together to give a unique approach to truth, because it's not a very common perspective that we can find
Right.
when we look into it.
So on the news side, I think journalists have to be very careful about letting their faith creep into their reporting too much, which I might have been guilty of in the past. When I worked at the Star-Telegram, I remember one day my editor took me to lunch and he said, "I don't want you to write any more religion stories." He said, "Because I think you're too close to it." And I was young, and I was probably I'm not sure that was the right move on his part, but I'm also not sure that I was totally objective, because it's hard to be totally objective. So in just owning that, but on the opinion side, there's a little more freedom for me to say this. I realize I'm coming from a specific perspective, and this is my perspective. And I don't think we would ever want to publish someone of any faith that says, like we like to publish independent faith perspectives, but with the humility of like, this is my perspective, I respect other people's perspectives, that kind of thing. But that's different than just completely saying that faith has no place in the opinion pages, because it does. And our faith-related content is some of the best read content that we have. For a long time, we were doing this thing called Living Our Faith, opinion series, and we just got faith leaders from churches and synagogues and mosques and all over to write, and readers loved that. So I think there's sometimes a misperception in journalism that faith has to be excluded, like there's no place for it. And I think there is a place for it with, like I said, with some guardrails or humility about, I mean, we're not publishing a religious publication. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I guess it does, because, well, if you think about it, as long as faith is a part of society, journalism does have to reflect that to an extent, at least. And it is a version of the truth that you present from your own perspective.
And we live in North Texas, the area we serve, is a pretty religious place. The percentage of people who attend worship services here is very high. If we were serving a city that was more secular, if we were in maybe Portland or something like that, it would make sense to have less faith content. So that's another important factor. I think we publish more perspectives from Christian authors, and I'm always looking for authors of other faiths. We just had something from a Jewish leader, but the area that we serve, North Texas, is largely Christian, even though the neighborhood where I live, which is right around the corner, is, I think, majority Hindu now. It's very religiously diverse in my neighborhood. Do you have a faith background? Are you?
Well, my origins is from India, and my parents, they're Hindus. But I guess there is a broader umbrella of what comes under Hinduism, and I may be not in the same strand as they are. But I do prescribe to the faith nonetheless.
And see, I think that's important for non-Hindus to understand the strains within Hinduism, how different groups of Hindus think about things differently, just as it's important for Hindus or Muslims or someone else to understand a little bit of the nuances within Christianity. I think that makes the whole thing richer if we understand each other.
Yeah, it just helps with cohesiveness in the community when we understand each other better. So, to touch up on your pastoral background a little bit, does your pastoral background, and obviously it lets you interact more with people on a more different scale than would something else, right? Being a pastor, people come and seek you for guidance and stuff like that. So when you do that, do you ever see misinformation affecting people emotionally?
Yeah, for sure. I got off of social media a couple of years ago, and then just a few days ago, somebody sent me like something on Facebook, so I clicked on it, I went back onto Facebook, and I started scrolling, and I was like, oh, now I remember why I got off social media, because there was tons of disinformation. Some of it was like sort of faith related, like, you know, sort of churchy stuff, but had misinformation in it. And there's just a lot of that out there. So this is maybe a chance for me to get on my soapbox about traditional media. I think there's still a place for traditional media, especially print, because journalists are trained how to fact check and how to cite sources and how to do all these things that make what you read in the paper more trustworthy. And so I think we would be better off if, I mean, sure, there's always going to be a place for social media, but I just think we should trust it less. There's there's value in having professionals do the journalism.
That makes sense. And
there's a great line from Aaron Sorkin. You know who Aaron Sorkin is?
No.
He's a screenwriter, filmmaker, anyway. And he said, back when, a few years ago, people were complaining about the media elite, and he had this line that was like, I prefer my media to be like, or something like, I prefer, like my heart surgeons and my airline pilots, I prefer my media to be elite. Meaning like, let's not let amateurs do this, because we wouldn't let amateurs do heart surgery. Not that I'm saying. Yeah.
That does make sense because, and I used to enjoy print media until very recently when it was hard to come by where I live right now. I don't know if you know this, but back in India, the print media is still the primary way to consume information. So you get newspapers in the morning.
Right.
And it always used to be a fun experience, like when you're getting ready for school. Back then I was young. I didn't really pay attention to like the first few pages. I went to the sports section. I read up everything over there, and then I did one of those crosswords, or at least tried to. And then I'd leave for school. That used to be a part of my routine, and sadly now it's not. Hopefully I can bring that back someday.
That's great. And when I say print, by the way, I don't necessarily mean on paper, like on a dead tree. Like all the content that we produce, you can access on a device as well as in print.
Right.
So when I say print or newspaper, people think this. I just mean like the content itself has been vetted and fact-checked and reported differently if it comes from a publication like the Usmore News than if it comes on your TikTok
that makes
feed.
sense.
Yeah.
So you're a commentary editor, as you just said. So when you do commentary editing, you need to blend both your opinion and facts to produce a unique style of writing. So how do you balance that? How do you balance your free expression versus your factual responsibility?
I tell contributors who, send us stuff for publication that a good column is 80% information and 20% persuasion. So it ought to be that like I've done the research, I've quoted the experts, or I've dug into the data, whatever, and here's 10 paragraphs that explain all the data that I'm, that are building toward a conclusion. And at the end, tell me, because of all these facts that are verifiable, that are not opinion, therefore I come to this conclusion. And so that can be helpful. So that's maybe a rule of thumb: 80% information, 20% persuasion. And we tell people to be more persuasive than provocative. So we're not really interested in sort of lobbing rhetorical grenades. Just like try to treat me like we're doing this,
Right.
like we're sitting down for coffee, and we maybe we disagree, but we want to have a respectful conversation. That's different than treating me like an enemy that you would never sit down for coffee with.
I can see that, especially with how we're evolving as a society. We focus more on our disagreements and often let them take over the humanity that is common between us. I found that rather concerning and disheartening, if you will. So, on the topic of human stories, right? So you wrote stories, for example, where you introduced James Armstrong.
Yeah.
So how do human stories like that? How do stories that present humans themselves? How do they interact with the sphere of misinformation? What I'm trying to get into is like, how do humans themselves who are being reported on not suffer, especially particularly, but how are they themselves being impacted by misinformation and libel that is spread online?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to be a victim of libel or slander. I'm sure there are tons of examples. I can't think of one right now, but there are literally lives that have been ruined because of false information spread about them online. Maybe the one that comes to mind is you may have been following the senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, was championing this new law, which passed now, that would give harsher penalties for people who create like fake porn. So like you're angry at your ex-girlfriend. I'm not saying this to you, but you're angry at somebody. You put her face on. You use AI to put her face and create revenge porn.
Right.
And I mean, he was doing that because he knew of someone, a young lady in Texas who that happened to, and it was devastating to her, right? So,
yeah, that makes sense.
Terrible.
So when you look at it, and that is obviously like on a wider scale, how that's impacting sensational cases like that.
Right.
When you look at it from a local media perspective, right? When you look at the way maybe a local hero or a well-known person or a local official, do they often come under these kinds of mistreatment?
Well, local officials are called ugly names and slandered all the time in private conversations or on social media or whatever. For sort of mainstream, reputable publishers, it doesn't happen. It happens almost never because we're accountable. And so that's another thing, a way to think about social media that might interest you. Right now, we haven't figured out how to police social media. And social media companies want the freedom of being a publisher without any of the responsibilities. So what they're saying is, we're not publishers, we're just utilities. We're like the poles and wires that carry the, phone conversations. And you can't hold a phone company responsible if a crime boss uses a phone to plan a crime. You can't sue AT&T for allowing the criminal activity to go across its wires. It's not responsible for that. But you can sue a newspaper if I publish an op-ed that says the mayor is corrupt or that the president took a bribe or whatever. I'm held accountable for that. The paper can be sued and has been sued for libel and defamation and stuff like that. So we have responsibility to fact check, and it happens all the time. I get submissions that make accusations against people that aren't properly supported, and I have to reject those or edit them or whatever. So that to answer from our perspective, we don't publish libel, but we've got safeguards multiple editors in place to make sure we're not publishing something that's libelous. But those safeguards don't exist in a lot of publications, and they definitely don't exist online,
right.
or like social media platforms.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So while we're on the topic of local media, right? So in the past, and it is happening currently as well, people have stopped paying attention to local media. People have moved away from local media and have taken on more national sources, if you will, more popular sources. I don't want to use the word reputable, because both the local media and national media is reputable, but they're often more popular and they overshadow local media. And I guess local media, to an extent, is the one that can properly display local issues, everyday lives of citizens. But why is it that local media is being paid less attention to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know if this is answering the why question, but a way to think about how this happened is, or what is happening, is we've sort of gamified and nationalized the news. So national news sort of sucks the air out of everything, and because it gins people up, it pits people against each other. There's tribes, there's teams, your team red or team blue, whatever, and that contributes to sort of the gamification of news. So I think a lot of people consume news the same way they consume college sports. Like, the outcome is not really going to directly affect me, but I just really want to see my side win, right? And like, I know people that were very worked up about the governor's race in Georgia last cycle, very interested, reading all the news about it. Who occupies the governor's mansion in Georgia is not going to affect a Texan, but they just really wanted their party to win that seat, And so we sort of gamified the news. It's like cheer for your team, and that has done damage to the news industry. And then because it's exciting, because it's a game, people pay more attention to the national level where that game gets played out than the local level, where there's a saying about potholes aren't Democratic or Republican. They're just potholes, so just fill the potholes, take care of the streets, make the schools run, make the buses and trains run. Like, those aren't quite as exciting, but they affect people's lives.
Right.
If you can't get to work because the bus is late, running a city affects people's lives, and that gets overlooked. And it's getting overlooked more and more because the number of Americans who live in a news desert is growing. Local news outlets are closing left and right. So I don't know if that answers why, and it certainly didn't answer the question about how we fix it, but it's happening.
Do you know how local media can adapt? Or do you have any suggestions out?
There's lots of people thinking about this. One of them is a guy named Bill McKenzie, who writes for our pages. He's one of our columnists. He also works at the Bush Center. And he's done a lot of work on, like, especially rural media, because these little towns in rural Texas, their newspapers are closing all the time. So he's a good one to pay attention to. And then there's another group, I forget what they're called. It's like the Rural News Project or something like that, that's thinking about how to rescue some of those papers. Some of it's funding, a lot of it's trust, like I said. A lot of these smaller communities are losing population as well as losing so there's just fewer readers. And then another thing that I would say is that people in general read less. It's not just news. People read, like, I saw a stat recently about the number of Americans who will not read a single book this year, and it's a lot. So people just read less, and so that there's fewer readers in general, so that means there's going to be fewer news readers too. How to fix it, I don't know. I think the only one idea that I have that I'd like to see somebody try is, I grew up in a small town in West Texas, so I'm thinking about those rural places, and there's lots of like a weekly newspaper in these neighboring cities, and there might be a way to sort of buy up a bunch of those and consolidate their operations, so you don't have to pay for multiple printing presses, and you don't have to pay for multiple ad reps and whatever, and maybe you could do a area conglomerate or something, but I don't know if that would work.
Right. And I guess that does make sense. A bigger company is difficult for itself to fail. So I spoke to Mr. Dan Kohler a while ago about, well, our conversation also veered into this topic of local media, and how, well, readership is obviously falling, and how that might be harmful for the local community. Because we were on the topic of misinformation. We were talking about how misinformation can often be prevented if the news is reported on a local level. Local news about local issues are probably more trustable than national news about local issues, because it may get distorted when it passes through mediums, rather than when a local reporter looks at what's happening and writes it down. Do you?
Yeah, I think that's true, and because you're closer to the correcting influences. So if Dan, who does great work, by the way, I'm a subscriber to the Coppell Chronicle. If he publishes something factually inaccurate about a political candidate, well, that candidate has Dan's number. Like he's going to let him know, and the steps to correct it. There aren't very many steps to correct it, and it's going to get corrected right away, or it's never going to get published because he knows who to call that or whatever. On the national level, if the New York Times doesn't get it wrong very often, but if they publish something inaccurate, there's a lot of competing voices to help them that are asking them to correct it one way or the other. Maybe it's not a correction because what about this? It's not technically wrong. It gets muddied, and it passes through a lot more steps instead of just the candidate calls the publisher of the thing and says, "Hey, this is why it's wrong." That's not a great answer, but yeah, there's just on a local level, there's more immediate accountability.
And does the public sentiment about local media reflect that?
I don't know. I mean, people intuit that Washington's farther away and it's harder to speak into that conversation. So maybe on that level, yeah. But I think there's a lot of people that feel that City Hall is also impenetrable. So I don't know if that's true. Yeah.
Could the decline in local media interests also be correlated with a decline in interest in local affairs?
Sure. Yeah, and especially if local affairs are kind of not so bad. I mean, if the schools are pretty good and the potholes are not awful and the water comes on when you turn on the tap, then people kind of get, apathetic. They're like, well, there's not a crisis, so nothing gets people interested in government that like a crisis. So, yeah.
So does that? Well, you mentioned how a crisis gets people interested, right? So would that make local media, from time to time, more prone to try adopting a strategy like that to maintain viewership?
Yeah, like gin up a crisis. Yeah. Well, there are certainly media outlets that do that. There's certainly national media outlets that do that, and I think there are also some local media outlets that do that. So yeah, the answer is yes. And look, I could make the Dallas Morning News wildly profitable tomorrow, because the the market will reward that. I mean, yes, it's a temptation for journalists, and also it's a temptation because it works. You can get lots of clicks by publishing inflammatory, outrageous, get people worked up content, creating a crisis. And like I said, I could make our paper. We could make a lot of money. We don't do that because one, it's wrong. It's the wrong thing for democracy, and it's lying to people. And also because I think in the long run it wouldn't pay off. In the long run, those people are going to see through that. But mostly because it's just the wrong thing to do. But yeah, the answer is yes. People do that.
So while we're on the topic of inflammatory rhetoric and how that gets people riled up and more interested, are there any other ways that misinformation is so compelling? Because, well, one of the reasons is because misinformation and disinformation is often very inflammatory. It often gets people riled up. It makes them believe what they want to believe.
Yes.
Are there any other ways that make misinformation more compelling?
Are you familiar with the idea of confirmation bias?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's what's being served by a lot of that misinformation. And like I mentioned, scrolling through Facebook the other night, what I was seeing, I don't know how accurate it was, but it had an element of truth. It just wasn't in context, or it wasn't. It was sort of serving a. So let me give you see if I can give you this specific example without naming anyone. We were considering a submission about RFK, about Robert Kennedy, and it dealt with his, sort of vaccine denial. Now, to be fair to him, he's been called like a vaccine denier or anti-vax or whatever. I don't think he thinks that vaccines never work. Like he's painted with too broad a stroke by his opponents sometimes. But of course he has raised these things like he has sown doubt in people's minds about the effectiveness of vaccines, which are largely effective, right? So this submission was trying to defend RFK and pull out some of those nuances, and it was quoting an interview that he gave where he did address these things with nuance. I forget the interview that he gave. It was like a televised interview, and he was talking with specificity and nuance about, well, this percentage of these vaccines seem to be ineffective in these scenarios, whatever. And he was responsible in that interview. And this submission ignored all the interviews that he gave where he was not nuanced and specific. He was just throwing out vaccines don't work, whatever. And then the same piece quoted Anthony Fauci about COVID vaccines. Now, Anthony Fauci did hundreds of interviews, during the pandemic, and in almost all of them, and most of them, he was nuanced and specific. He would say, no vaccine is 100% effective, but these have shown to be largely effective, like I'm saying, nuanced. But this one interview he gave, he just basically said, vaccines always work. Go get vaccinated. They always work. If you don't get vaccinated, you're going to get COVID and die. Like he was not careful in this one interview. So this one submission took the least guarded, least defensible quote from Anthony Fauci and the most careful, most defensible quote from RFK. Now, both of those were accurately reported. Anthony Fauci did say this wrong. And RFK has said this right. And we debated a lot because the guy had done his homework. And he was not factually inaccurate. But was it misleading? Was it misleading to paint those two guys with those brushes? Do you see? That?
Yes.
It gets into the weeds very quick. So that's maybe an example of I don't even know you'd call that misinformation, but it was leading you toward I want my biases about this issue to be affirmed. So how do I see we tend to excuse all kinds of sloppy journalism whenever the viewpoint is our own, and when the viewpoint is affirming somebody else's that we disagree with, we have no time for sloppy journalism. Everything has to be so that was a long example.
No, but it was an insightful one, because it is obvious that was factually correct, but there is it's hard to come up with a word to define it other than misleading.
Misleading,
So how can you not combat just this, but misinformation in general in the perspective of a journalist?
I mean, I think my approach is we're just trying to put out quality, vetted, fact-checked information and be a reliable source, and hope that people realize, and I'm not saying every news outlet other than Dallas Morning News is not trustworthy. There's lots of good news outlets out there, but hopefully they're all working on putting out reliable information so that unreliable sources
are drowned out, maybe.
Are eventually people realize. And back to the accountability issue, I think one of the things that's that readers should think about is corrections. Are we accountable to our readers? And if the news outlet that you follow never issues a correction, either they're the only news outlet in the history of humanity that gets it right 100% of the time, or they're not accountable to readers. And unfortunately, we do. We sometimes issue corrections, or we publish letters that say, have a different viewpoint. We try to listen when our readers tell us that we missed it.
And so, I'm interested by corrections now. So it is often that when people listen to the news or any information in general, first impressions stick. First impressions are hard to fight. So how does that work into you issuing corrections, and in how effective these corrections are to actually reaching people?
You almost never see a correction for like an impression. This story gave the impression that the president is a bad guy or whatever. Well, that's not like a factual inaccuracy, so those don't get corrections usually. I'm not saying that. I'm not excusing those. We shouldn't give false impressions, but corrections normally happen for like we said there were 49 states and there are actually 50 states. Like, it's a factually and it's verifiable. That's normally what gets corrections. The more, kind of impressions or that kind of thing just happens. That debate happens with reader feedback, with us watching for the next time around. Are we giving this the wrong impression? Okay, I think I can share this story. Here's another story. We had a big debate recently about language around immigrants. Ken Paxton called this one person who has now been arrested an illegal immigrant. Our style, AP style, is to call those people undocumented immigrants. No, he called them illegal alien. Our style is undocumented immigrant. For a lot of people, I think those two terms would mean the same thing. But Paxton is a law enforcement is an officer of the law. He was the chief prosecutor of the state. For him, using the word illegal, that means something. And so, were we misrepresenting his statement by using AP, by using our style and calling him? And we had a big debate about that. Like, should we go away from AP style in order to more accurately reflect what he was saying? And some of us felt like, look, we're talking about the same people. If you're here if you sort of snuck across the border and you're not documented, you're illegal.
Mm-hmm.
It means the same thing. But others of us thought, no, he means something specific. And there is a category, I guess, this is where it gets into the vagaries of immigration law that I don't understand. There is a category of people who are illegal but documented.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how that works. Anyway, I've gotten off the topic now, but what'd you ask?
How this idea of issuing corrections?
So that wouldn't have been a correction, I don't think. We wouldn't have issued a correction to say, we used the word dog instead of canine here. That was because it wasn't factually inaccurate, but we had a whole debate about whether it gave the wrong. It wasn't the best reporting we could have done. And that's a whole other category of things that don't fit into the correction box.
Right.
Yeah,
that makes sense. So I guess we're coming to the end of the interview. I had really insightful conversations. But before we end, I was hoping to ask you, do you have any personal habits that help you stay focused on quote-unquote real news instead of factually misleading, incorrect, or otherwise motivated reporting and stuff like that?
Yeah. I feel like I've spent the whole time bashing social media, but I got off of that social media, and I haven't missed it. I do try to read a variety of news sources. I don't read like baldly partisan news.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe on the left, I would consider like Newsmax or some of those. I mean, on the right, some of those very. And on the left, maybe Mother Jones or something. I don't read those, but I do read like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. The Times definitely leans further left. The Journal, especially in its opinion section, leans right. So reading diverse news sources is helpful. And the other thing I would say is just perspective outside the news. There is such a thing as reading too much news. There is such a thing as sort of news junkie, and I think read the classics now and then. Read some perspectives from long ago or from around the world that's not your back. Your lens. That can help. Get us out of our bubble.
That makes sense. So, how do you reckon people like me, young people who see issues within society like this, what can we do to try combating our own respective issues? And mine in particular is misinformation. When we don't particularly have that much of a say in how government itself works, how can we effectuate change as we like to see it come about?
That is a great question, and I would say you're already ahead. You're miles ahead of most of your peers at your age that you're even thinking about these things. I think most people your age are probably thinking about how to level up on Call of Duty or something. So, I don't know specifically, like, how do we combat this problem in the Fourth Estate? Is it reform inside newsrooms? Is it market? Is it starting new newsrooms to balance them? Is it marching and picketing? Is it unions? Is it, how do you improve the media landscape? There's probably 100 different answers to that. The two things I would say is, one, don't imagine that, our problems are new and a little different than they have been in the past, but there's really nothing new under the sun. And I think people sometimes imagine there was once like this golden age of American journalism when we always got it right, and it was never partisan. Like, that has never really existed. So, and then the other thing I would say is that lately I've been thinking about how important it is for us to understand and appreciate the system of checks and balances that our country's founders set in place, which they spent a lot of time thinking about, and for us to work within the confines of the constitutional order to achieve those reforms. And I think what's dangerous recently is sometimes we reach, particularly partisans, are tempted to reach outside of the constitutional confines to achieve results. We're not getting the results we want from elections, so we're going to change election law. Or we're going to not just change election law, we're going to do something illegal to get the election outcome that we want. We're going to storm the Capitol on January 6th, or we're going to deport people without due process, or whatever. And I think in whatever reform we pursue, including reforms in the private industry, not in Washington, reforms in the news industry, all of that, we got to do so in a way that sort of respects democracy, which I think most journalists would absolutely agree with. So, yeah, maybe those are two things to keep in mind. I don't know what to tell you about starting a newspaper that gets it right all the time.
Well, I guess while we're on the topic of partisan newspapers, I guess newspapers were way more partisan back in the day, especially this year I read a book about the election of 1800, about how it was the beginnings of modern partisanship that we see today. And you hear about newspapers reporting them back then, and they blatantly said up in their title, Federalist, Democratic Republican.
Right.
So I guess we've come a long way from there since there.
Yes.
But I guess the key difference is, back then your diversity of opinion came from reading multiple sources. Yeah. But I guess today not everyone has the time to do that, and I guess that leads to issues.
I think it does. I think we're better off than we were then, in terms of partisanship of the press. So that's good perspective. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've had a very insightful conversation.
So is this for a school project, or you're just...
No, I'm just interested on my own, because as I told you, I saw this quite a bit on the campaign trail, where we'd have to constantly send out information to correct it. So what if we went there? What if we weren't paying attention? Now you get the wrong information. Now you can't go vote because you had the wrong times. So it's, even though it's little information, for that particular person it matters a lot. Yeah,
I know you're ready to go, but that's one of the things I will say is I think we need to be better news consumers. Mm-hmm. So if you're sort of gullible enough to take your news information from the political mailer from a candidate in your mailbox, that sounds dismissive, but. We just need to know better. Mm-hmm. We need to know better than to do that. Mm-hmm. And even with a established publication, I think good journalists invite fact checking. We want it. It's not that we want to always be right. It's that we want to get to the most accurate things. And so that's why good journalists show their work. And most readers read right over the sourcing. I did this. I taught a class recently, and I gave them all a story to read from our newspaper, right? And then I had them turn over the page, and I said, "Name one source." And it was like a crime story. So it was, so and so was convicted of murder, and it was a courtroom story. And I was like, "Name one source," and they were like. Well, the source is the newspaper. I was like, no, the source. And then someone remembered the byline. Well, the source was, John Doe, the author. I was like, no, he's not a source. The sources were the DA, right, who said court documents, arrest records, police. These are the sources. But news consumers read right over those sources. So when it comes to, when are the voting times? When are they open? if you read that in the paper, one, you can go to the Secretary of State's website and get it straight from the source, or you can read it in the paper that cites the Secretary of State's website, right? Or links to the Secretary of State's. You just get verifiable information. If you're getting it from a Facebook post or the political mailer, you don't have that. It's not verified information, but most people don't see the difference. They don't realize, oh, this is verified, or I can verify this. They just take whatever comes to them as the truth. Anyway, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a fun conversation and an enlightening one as well.
Hey, if you're interested in going into journalism, I would encourage it. Dude, I really enjoy the job, and we have internships every summer. Our intern starts next week for this summer, but maybe next summer.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good to meet you.